And welcome to this week's class. This week we will be talking about workforce performance. So let's begin. What exactly is performance management? Well, self-explanatory. It's how we as HR managers are able to assess and systematically determine whether a person is doing their job correctly, incorrectly, etc. The textbook definition is performance management is the application of a system and process involving evaluating the employee's performance against a specific set of standards that has been designed specifically for them and to help them develop plans to improve if needed. So in order for us to understand the performance management process, first we have to understand the performance management model or pyramid, which basically is a process that can both go from the bottom of the pyramid to the top or from the top to the bottom. Basically, there is a division between execution and planning. So us as HR managers, we will have to be involved in both aspects of it. So for example, when we begin with performance planning or performance management planning, we begin with the mission. What is our company's mission statement? Then that is specified and translated into the company's strategic objectives. What are the strategic objectives that have been set for this fiscal year 2021? For example, this then comes to the strategic goals, which are much more specific based on the objectives that have been set. Then they are specific to performance goals. Now we are moving from the organization to the employee themselves. So we are going to, for that person's specific job, we are going to determine what are their goals for that job across the fiscal year. Then we are going to see and determine what initiatives or programs or other types of workshops have to be included and have to be offered to our employee in order for them to be able to achieve their performance goals. Then we're going to identify and establish the performance indicators. What are those metrics that we are going to use in order for us to be able to measure whether or not they are effectively doing their job? And this will help us to identify the performance targets. What should we shoot for this employee to achieve? Which brings us to the execution. So we are going to, based on the performance targets, we are going to see and execute the performance indicators and so on and so forth. So as you can see, we are present throughout the entire, the two aspects of the performance management pyramid. Now, the performance management cycle is basically a continuous dynamic cycle in which all managers or employee are sitting or are communicating and are being able to understand the expectations that each one have of the other. So for example, the planning phase, it's the first part of the year where, for example, your boss sits you down and says, okay, well, these are the objectives that we have for your role this year. And this is established, and this is when the employee begins to execute their tasks based on the specific results or the objectives that have been set and defined. So months 1 and 2 are the execution, where the person is working towards those goals. During month 3 to 9, it's the check-in phase. And this is, again, something continuous where the manager will be sitting down with the employee and they will be having their updates. There are companies that do a weekly performance management. There are some that do per trimester, quarter, per yearly or bi-yearly. This will really depend on the organization and what they have established. But at the beginning of the year, you will sit down, you as the HR manager will have established the performance management metrics for your employees. And so you will have to set the performance objectives. You will have to set any development goals. Like, for example, we are going to train this person in communication skills, for example. And so we are going to set those goals as well. Together with the employee, you will establish the resources that they will need in order to achieve those goals and identify any barriers that may stop them from achieving those goals, or support systems that they have at their disposal in order to achieve those goals. During the check-in phase, like I said, this can be done, and this is done in a periodic way, and it can be more frequent or less frequent. But basically, what you do is it's self-explanatory. We check in. We ensure that the employee has understood what they have been asked. They are working towards that goal, and we discuss the results to date. We review, and if needed, we revise the objectives, and we identify and remove any barriers or obstacles that have come up that would stop the employee from reaching those results by the end of the year. And then the last part of the year is the assessment. So this is at the end of the year, some companies can say, well, this is when it's the salary appraisal, or the person wants promotion. We can determine if they are going to have a promotion, etc. This is the assessment phase. And this is when it's no longer checking in. It's no longer an open conversation. It's performance management assessment, in which what has happened to date, you are going to be responsible for. So at this moment in time, this is when the manager and the employee sit down to actually speak about what has happened over the past year. Has the employee reached their performance goals? What do we need to improve in order for next year the employee to be more successful, or to be as successful as this year? What could potentially next year's objectives be? What development opportunities can we offer our employee? Or perhaps it's even the employee who says, I see that I am lacking in this aspect, or I would like to learn more about this aspect. And that's when we would be able to set any development or training programs. And of course, we will assess. This means that we are actually going to give them a rating: satisfactory, not satisfactory, needs improvement, etc. So let me share this video with you, which is a little bit more explanatory for you guys. So as you guys can see, one of the main challenges that we have as managers is actually being able to stay on top of the employee and ensuring that they are constantly aligned with the objectives and they are working towards their goals. Many times we all, managers, employees, subordinates, top management, we get so sucked into the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty, that we sometimes lose sight of what the big picture is and what it is that we are working towards. And so it's important that as managers, we are able to keep on top of these people and ensure that they are always working towards their goal. So performance management has to do with assessing a number of different variables. It includes identifying the metrics that you need to measure, but overall, we can say that performance management includes identifying any learning or development needs. If we are going to be putting Edward as head of sales, and Edward doesn't have very good soft skills, then we will have to train him to be able to develop his soft skills. We also need to align individual objectives and business goals. How can we align Edward's new role as head of sales? How is that aligned, and his objectives to, for example, I don't know, expand to the new region? How does that specifically align with our business goals? And this has to be done with each individual employee. Then performance management also includes assessing past performance. As we all know, we are all different, and there are people who are able to change and improve at a much greater pace than other people. So, of course, we will assess against past performance and not peers. So we can see that if that person is actually really improving and putting in all their effort, or if they are basically the same as last year. Then we also need to identify the target future performance. What is it that they want to achieve? The target. What is the goal that we want them to achieve in the future? We also have to be able to manage underperformance. Remember, HR is about having the right people in the right time, in the right place, in the right number. If we do not have the correct person in that job post, there is potential that is being underused. That person may also be feeling not that person may be feeling that they are being taken for granted, that they are not trusted with important aspects of business that perhaps they could be trusted with, and they would like to grow within the company. So ensure that you are able to identify all of those employees that are actually not being used fully, and that could be performing at a higher productivity rate. Also identify talent, identify where are those people that could add more value to our company. Perhaps the person who will be providing more value is in the front desk, and we will never know it because that person is just picking up phones. Or perhaps it's the person in the mailroom. It's being able for HR to be able to open or see a wider perspective and be able to open our mind to see talent where we may not have seen it before. Then performance and management also has a lot to do with engagement, engaging our employees, making sure that they are also aligned and committed to our company's end goals. Of course, very important, the reward system. The salary has a huge aspect and has a lot to do with performance management, because people are going to be paid based on their performance as well. And they are going to have salary raises or perks added, etc., based on their performance. So this is extremely important. And compliance. Compliance has to do with the person being able to comply. In a nutshell, being able to comply with the company's rules, regulations, follow procedures, etc. So what is the roadmap of performance management? Well, we can see where we start with strategic planning. We set the goals. The top level of management set the general business's goals for fiscal year 2021. Then each department manager translates that specific goal for that department. How is HR going to be able to assist in the business reaching the general goals. Then the manager passes this information on to the worker, to the employee. Together with the manager, the employee also sets the goals that are aligned to match the company's goals. And the manager and the boss, or the manager and the employee, or the boss and the employee, will actually sit down to take a look at what those objectives would look like and be able to ensure that these are the correct ones. And so we will begin moving forward based on these goals. Then, after the months pass, we see that the job may have changed, or the organization's goals may have changed, etc. We know that an organization is not static, it's ever changing. So as many times as needed, you will need to redefine the employee's individual goals based on what the current situation is, or the current job is. Then we move on to the performance review. And here we can see different types of performance reviews. We can see performance reviews that are based on the boss. So the boss fills out the performance review and discusses the performance review with the employee. The employee is also asked to fill out a performance review and discusses it with the manager as well. Then there are other levels of management that also may fill out a performance review for an individual employee, like, for example, the second layer of management, or even peers. There are companies that have peer performance management systems in which it's actually your peers that evaluate the rest of their team members, and of course customers. And this is in brackets, because in quotation marks, excuse me, because these reviews can happen at any time, and they can be anything from reviews on Google to actually a complaint that you have received that a customer has filed, etc. So these reviews can come in at any time, and of course will be collected and will be used at the moment of doing the employee's individual performance review. Then, based on all of these results, there will be a reward and promotion scheme put in place for that person. Now, there may be promotions and raises, or there may be no promotions and raises due to a number of variables. And then, of course, there will be moments when there will be opportunities for career development, as I explained before. And usually the raise, promotions, career development, etc., usually happens at the same meeting with the performance review with the manager at the end of the year. And as you can see here, this roadmap has a few information that specifies whether or not it always happens or doesn't. Ultimately, these will change depending on the organization itself, but you guys can take this as a solid foundation for most HR departments in organizations. So what are the stages of performance management? Well, we've already seen them. First, we need to identify the performance dimensions. How are we going to measure how are we going to measure their performance, for example? Then we're going to develop these metrics, these measures. Then we're going to actually evaluate the employee's performance, provide feedback to the employee, and together with the employee, provide action plans to improve performance. Now, this is based on Lepak and Gowan, and there is actually a revision of these stages based on the current HR challenges that we have already, for example, we took a look at last week, I believe. So after we have actually developed the metrics, what it is that we're measuring and how we're going to measure it, we then identify the standards upon which these metrics are going to be measured, or the goals or the objectives. And then the fourth stage would be that we actually implement. So this is actually when the employee goes and begins working based on the implementation of and achievable of these goals. And then, of course, and this is very important, which is after we have actually developed action plans to either improve or accelerate growth, etc., then we're going to review and revise. And as you guys can see, this is going to be a more complete view of the stages of performance management and much more up to date based on the current HR challenges that we have. today. So to finish up this section, I thought that this comic strip is really funny because many times we find ourselves in this situation where there is a person who wants to ask for a salary, but the boss doesn't believe that the person is doing the work that they should in order to reach that salary. So how important is it for us to actually be able to objectively measure the effectiveness of the workforce? Extremely. And we'll talk about that in the next section. I will be right back.